4 strong men broke into the girl's room and cut open her sleeping trousers, then put a wooden stick to her chin and forced her to open her mouth. Despite the girl's pleas, they didn't show any mercy, and after 3 seconds of tireless efforts, the girl lost her incisor. Then the criminals pulled out a pistol and approached her slowly, looking at the gun in front of his eyes. Bela was in a state of despair, but he didn't realize that the criminals had put the pistol in his mouth. In the face of these 4 reckless criminals, Bela could do nothing but hope that the ordeal would soon be over. Bela regretted that she had not realized that she was being watched by 4 criminals just because she was running around without her underwear. But Bela did not want to be a tool for the criminals to vent their spleen, and so she seized the bottle of wine from Huzinan, knocking him to the ground, then blinded the fat man with a mace, while she herself took advantage of the chaos and ran out. Bela did not dare to stop, but she did not want to see the criminals. Soon the outlaw realized that he had run 5 kilometers in a huff and panicked. He kept looking back for fear that the criminals would catch up with him, but the next moment, he bumped into a police officer, which gave Bela a ray of hope to tell the police chief about what had happened to him. But unbeknownst to him, the police chief was even more desperate. In order to bring the outlaw to justice, Bela brought him to the scene of the crime. However, the police chief didn't find the outlaw. Instead, he seized a prohibited article, but no matter how Bela tried to explain it, the police chief simply pushed him down and took him away from him, but the police chief didn't care. But no matter how Bela explains, the sheriff ignores him and presses him against the wall in order to search him. But Bela finds something wrong because the sheriff's hands roam all over his body and even locks his neck and speaks in a filthy language. But before Bela can react, the 4 criminals burst through the door and Bela realizes that even the sheriff and the criminals are a gang and that they are all surrounded by them. And that Bela cries and weeps and is too desperate to utter a word. And then the police come to the scene of the crime and take him away. The sheriff also took off his disguise and threatened Bela to take off his clothes. But despite his desperate situation, Bela refused to give in, so the sheriff grabbed him by the hair and pressed him to the ground, only to be greeted by a slap in the face, which infuriated the sheriff so much that he ordered the fat man to take a camera to film the whole thing, and then proceeded to assault Bela in turn, until several people frothed in tears and refused to give up, and Bela's eyes were so tortured that he was blinded by a gasp of relief, while several people were singing with great excitement. As he walked out of this heartbreaking place in silence, he dragged his wretched body through the forest, looking for an escape, but he did not expect to see the outlaws again in front of him. At that moment, he suddenly opened his arms and jumped back into the fast-flowing river, because this was his only chance of survival, and this was the very act that would make the outlaws suffer. After searching the river for 8 hours without seeing a trace of Bela, the lead officer became furious and ordered several men to search for him for 24 hours or else they would not only lose their jobs but all of them would be sent to jail. But it was obviously too late, for Bela had already lurked in the fool's house. The fool was dumbfounded, and crawled over to apologize to Bela, but Bela became even angrier when she looked at his ugly face. But at the sight of his ugly face, Bela becomes even more furious, and in an instant takes the rope and puts it around his head, strangling the fool so that he can't breathe. Bela wants to stop, but remembering what he has been through, he resolutely drags the fool into the washroom. The picture takes a turn, and the fat man is searching for Bela in the forest. But in the next instant Bela appears before him, and, with a provocative grin, he steps on the rotting armor. But he steps on the rotten armor, and, as he hears the fat man's heartbreaking screams, the bearded man runs quickly over to him, and he can't see him. The man with the beard ran over to him. Bela had been waiting behind her, and when the man turned his head, she struck him with a stick, knocking him unconscious, and then walked towards the fat man to vent her anger. When the man woke up again, he found himself strapped to the top of the bathtub, with 2 wooden sticks underneath him, and a hose that kept adding water to the tub. She was so frightened that she screamed for help. But she was surprised to see her walk into the room, where she bent down to taunt him, then directly picked up a stick and struck it at the man, and then hit him with a blow. The bearded man was struck with a blow, and with tears in his eyes, he begged Beda to let him go, but Beda pressed his brain and shoved him into the stinking pool. He even poured water for you. Baldar, not having had enough, took a bucket of sulfuric acid powder and poured it all into the bath. But Bela did not do it again, but withdrew a stick from under him. The bearded man was in a panic. He hated himself for not having trained his planks to support him, and as his strength wore out, he could not hold himself up any longer, and was instantly disfigured by the sulfuric acid in a tank of lapis lazuli, and after repeated struggles, he plunged his head into the pool of sulfuric acid, and then it was the turn of the fat, camera-happy Beulah. Then it was the turn of Bela, the fat photographer, to tie him securely to a tree, first take out a dead rat and force it into his mouth, then set up a video camera to record the process of torture, and immediately after that, he took 2 hooks out of a sack and drove them straight through both of the fat man's eyes, and as soon as he had fastened the line securely, he took out the offal of a dead fish and smeared it evenly all over the fat man's face. Not only was the fat man unable to close his eyes after all this, he even kissed the fat man, and then he was forced to take a look at himself. Seeing himself being tortured to death, the smell of fish quickly fills the air, attracting crows to the area, and so the fat man's eyes and insides are hollowed out by the video camera. However, Bella's revenge plan has just begun, and there are still 2 of them on the loose, so Bella immediately dresses up as a hottie to get the attention of Bill, who's working at the gas station, and when he sees him, he's so eager to talk to him that he turns around and gives him an iron fist, and then he's so excited about him, he's not interested. When Bill woke up, he found himself stripped naked and his limbs were tied up securely. At this moment, Bela came slowly and claimed that he would give back to the man all the pain he had suffered. He first took out a tiger's pliers and stripped out Bill's teeth one by one. Even though Bill was in a lot of pain and suffering, Bela did not show any mercy. Instead, he took out a pistol and shoved it into his mouth so that he could feel the pain he had suffered while he was working at the petrol station. However, she never thought that Bill would taunt Bela when he was on the verge of death. Bela's anger was instantly ignited and she took out a 10-meter-long scissors, which made Bill freeze on the spot, but she didn't wait for him to react before the knife was used to kill him. She had one last goal in mind, and that was the sheriff, who had done her the most harm. But Bela, knowing she was no match for her, came to the sheriff's house, because she wanted to telephone him by pretending to be his daughter's teacher. The sheriff heard this and instantly sensed that something was wrong, and then, with a kick on the floor, he drove back to his house. But his wife told him that his daughter had been taken by her teacher to play in a park, and the sheriff, without a moment's hesitation, rushed to the park, where the sheriff had to go to the police station. But no matter how hard he searched, he couldn't find any trace of his daughter, and when he went back to his car in despair, Bela suddenly appeared and knocked him out with a stick, and when the sheriff woke up again, he found himself tied to a table with a shotgun at his back. He was so scared that he was in a state of shock, and the sheriff, who had always been so arrogant and bossy, cried like a lost child. However, Bela looked so helpless, as she had done before. Bela saw that the sheriff was getting angrier and angrier, and she couldn't bear it any longer, so she directly poured water on him. "I'm sorry, John and why, or more likely, you." After all of this, the sheriff finally let go of his posture and kept calling Bela Mom. But Bela did nothing of the sort. Instead, she slowly pulled out a piece of rope and attached it to the trigger of the shotgun and the other side to the wrist of the fool across the room. When the fool pulled on the rope, the sheriff would be shot through and through, and then Bela mercilessly walked out of the room and sat down on a log to wait for the 2 to be tried for their crimes. Soon after, the fool woke up from his coma and asked the sheriff, but the sheriff shouted at him not to move, but due to the extreme tension, the fool raised his hand and the 2 men were killed instantly, and finally, Bela was able to make the restoration. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you don't miss what's coming next.